Here we go again, and welcome to another poetry reading session on Morning Jim. This is September 18th, 2021 version, and before we get into the poetry reading, I'd like to recommend to you a book I was reading this week. It's entitled The Hemmingses of Monticello, An American Family by Annette Gordon Reed. It won a Pulitzer Prize and also a National Book Award. And it's a bestseller in the New York Times Book Review. I don't know yet what poem or poems will arise out of this great book. I may have to make an attempt to write one myself. There's a lot of material here. As you may know, Thomas Jefferson promised his wife on her deathbed that he would never remarry. He kept his promise, but eventually took as his mistress a 1/4 black woman named Sally Hemings, who was a slave he obtained from the estate of his father-in-law, John Wales, who it so happened was also the father of Sally Hemings, the slave. And that meant that the slave, Sally, was the half-sister of Jefferson's own wife, his late wife. And Jefferson's wife brought with her this Hemings family of slaves from her father's estate, and requested that they get special treatment at Monticello. The reason for this was not clearly stated, but I think Jefferson figured it out. At the rate the slave owners procreated with their female slaves, a few more generations of slavery would have given us mostly white slaves, it seems to me. That would have been a little odd, but I'm sure the slave owners of the South would have figured out some way to justify it, like they did everything else. But I don't want to go there. So we must come back now to poetry. Lacking a theme that appealed to me, I took up a surprise me theme this week. I stuck my finger at random into 3 books, and I'm reading the first poems that came up in each. The New Yorker Book of Poems, which I've read from before and mentioned to you, what a vast treasure trove of poetry it is. It gave us a poem by W.H. Auden, one of my favorite 20th century poets, and I hadn't read this poem before. It was written in 1939, and that alone may give you a clue as to the subject matter of the poem. For the youngsters in this audience, 1939 was when Hitler attacked Poland and began World War II, because then France and England both came into the war because they had treaties with Poland and so on and so forth. So I really enjoyed that poem, and I'll read it here in a minute. The next was a stab into Poetry 180, which is the Billy Collins try at getting more poetry taught in high schools. And finally, I chose Roy Beckmeyer's poem I've been wanting to read for quite a while because I think it's such an excellent poem. It's called This Poetry, and it's from his book Stage Whispers. So let me give you a look at each of these books that I've mentioned so far And this is The Hemmingses of Monticello, a prize-winning book, and really heavy. It has about 800 pages. About 750 of them are text. And I've made it almost to the end. I can't put it down because it's a good page turner, but it's also an accurate history. So then the Billy Collins book, I came up with a poem that's totally unlike the first poem that I got from the New Yorker. So I've got these three poems to read today, and I'm going to start with W.H. Auden's 1939 poem called Song. Say this city has 10 million souls. Some are living in mansions, some are living in holes, yet there's no place for us, my dear. There's no place for us. Once we had a country, and we thought it fair. Look in the atlas and you'll find it there. We cannot go there now, my dear. We cannot go there now. The consul banged the table and said, "If you've got no passport, you're officially dead." But we are still alive, my dear. But we are still alive. Went to a committee. They offered me a chair, asked me politely to return next year. But where shall we go today, my dear? Where shall we go today? Come to a public meeting. The speaker stood up and said, "If we let them in, they will steal our daily bread." He was talking of you and me, my dear. He was talking of you and me. Thought I heard the thunder mumbling in the sky. It was Hitler over Europe saying, "They must die." Oh, we were in his mind, my dear. Oh, we were in his mind. Saw a poodle wearing a jacket fastened with a pin. Saw a door open and a cat let in. But they weren't German Jews, my dear. But they weren't German Jews. Went down to the harbor and stood upon the quay. Saw the fish swimming as if they were free. Only 10 feet away, my dear. Only 10 feet away. Walked into a wood, saw the birds in the trees. They had no politicians and sang at their ease. They weren't the human race, my dear. They weren't the human race. Dreamt I saw a building with 1,000 floors, 1,000 windows, and 1,000 doors. None of them was ours, my dear. Not one of them was ours. Ran down to the station to catch the express, asked for 2 tickets to happiness. But every coach was full, my dear, but every coach was full. Stood on a great plain in the falling snow. 10,000 soldiers marched to and fro, looking for you and me, my dear. Looking for you and me. Well, that's an impressive and extremely sad poem to read. 1939 was the year he wrote that, and it was certainly a timely verse in its day, and it still is. I think this is appropriate for our own time when we seem to be entering a cancel culture which allows only certain opinions to appear in the press or online or any place. Unless, of course, you want to be canceled, just like the Jews at Auschwitz Only you would still be alive, unlike those poor souls. Okay, well, let's move to something a little less disturbing, and it's going to be a poem by Steve Kowit. Steve Kowit was an interesting person, but I really don't have time to go into his background here. I want to read his poem, which appears in Poetry 180, and it's called The Grammar Lesson. A noun's a thing, a verb's the thing it does. An adjective is what describes the noun. In, the can of beets is filled with purple fuzz. Of and with are prepositions. The's an article. A can's a noun. A noun's a thing. A verb's the thing it does. A can roll or not. What isn't was or might be. Might meaning not yet known. Our can of beets is filled with purple fuzz. Is present tense. While words like our and us are pronouns, i.e., it is moldy, they are icky brown. A noun's a thing, a verb's the thing it does. Is a helping verb. It helps because filled isn't a full verb. Can's what our owns in our can of beets is filled with purple fuzz. See? There's almost nothing to it. Just memorize these rules or write them down. A noun's a thing, a verb's the thing it does. The can of beets is filled with purple fuzz. Now, many of you have probably figured out already that this is a villanelle. Villanelle. We've run across those before. They usually come on me, and I'm halfway through them before I recognize what they are. Amazing how these keep showing up. Finally, here's a poem called This Poetry by Roy Beckemeyer. It's from his book, Stage Whispers. And I've been wanting to read this poem for some time, so this was not a thumb in the book or a finger in the book poem. This was a deliberate choice on my part to end the session. This poem is called This Poetry. Shakespeare's sonnets, perfect, sublime, this tortured rhyme. The thousands of years Homer thrives, our too short lives. Literature's long probity, this poetry. The bards in we, a coterie, their classics, with their long-armed reach. These stutters of our modern speech, this tortured rhyme, our too short lives, this poetry. Now, one of the reasons I was attracted to that poem is because it's in the author tells us this, I didn't recognize it, is in a Spanish form called an oviejo. And I need to look up a little bit more about that form, and it would be fun to write a poem using it. It's really a very good form, and it looks like it gives you more room to mess around than it would if it was a haiku or even a villanelle. These poems that I've read today challenge us in various ways. We need to think about their meanings, but also enjoy their poetic flow and rhythms. I hope you, as I, will be able to enjoy the improved weather as we enter this fall season. Enjoy some fresh garden vegetables at the local farmers market. That's what we've been doing here in Sewickley, Pennsylvania. And peaches, fresh peaches, homegrown peaches. They're just about over here, but if you live in Kansas, be on the lookout for the O. Henry peaches shipped in from Idaho. They're wonderful late-season peaches. Oh, I wish I had one right now. Okay, come back next week. We'll see what turns up. Enjoy your poetry in the meantime, and blessings to all of you.